It can be operating very soon. All they need to do is capture that CO2 and put it back into the reserves a few kilometres from here, which have held CO2 for millions and millions of years, Kieran. So this is a straightforward operation.
So straightforward. Millions and millions of years, the CO2 has been living there happily. We pulled it out. We said, we just need your friend. You can go back down in there. You just stay down there for millions and millions. It's really straightforward. It's so straightforward that we've never been able to make this work to date. Here's how not straightforward it is. Welcome everyone. My name is Richie Merzian.
Hi, I'm Polly Hemming.
And we're from the Climate and Energy team at the Australia Institute. And today we have a special episode of Spin Bin. Special because we're going to focus on a technology that maybe you've heard of. It's called carbon capture and storage. It's been a favorite of this federal government. Why? Is it because it actually works? No. Is it because it's cost effective? No. Is it because it's actually met numerous targets? No. It's because it's great marketing. It allows us to believe that we can continue to dig up and burn fossil fuels and literally bury those emissions under the carpet or in geological storages forever potentially.
Sounds foolproof, doesn't it? It's not a new technology. It's been around since about the 70s. Billions, squillions, if that's a number, has been spent on it since then. In Australia alone, we've spent about $3.5 billion on it since 2003.
And that's government funding?
Yes, that's government funding. And we all know government funding is...
Taxpayer funding.
Taxpayer funding, yeah, that's your money at work, folks. So despite billions being spent, Richie...
Nothing's worked.
Nothing's worked since wow. So like we do every week on Spin Bin, we're taking an interview with one of our politicians and we unpack it, debunk it, expose the spin and the tactics that they're using to try and get their ideas across the line. So like all the interviews with our beloved Minister for Emissions Reductions and Energy, it's full of spin, but the whole interview kind of operates on the premise that CCS is a legitimate climate solution. So if you watch the interview with the understanding that CCS is being used as a way to further entrench fossil fuel infrastructure, that'll probably make what he's saying a lot more clear.
With me, the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Angus Taylor. Minister, thank you very much for your time. You're at the Moomba LNG operations. There's going to be $15 million committed towards that facility with Santos. How soon before we see it operating and operating effectively?
That's a good question, right? So firstly, we have Minister Angus Taylor, the Minister for Emissions Reductions, in front of a site that is basically extracting gas and liquefying it and shipping it off overseas so that it can be burnt elsewhere and release lots of emissions. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to give them millions of dollars to hopefully bury some of those emissions underground. So how soon until that operates?
Well, this is not even a new project. Like Santos first announced this project in 2007, and then they had to can it in 2009 because they couldn't get $700 million from the government for the initial stages of it.
So now
I don't know.
So now they got a smaller amount, 15 million,
yeah.
But that's apparently enough to potentially kick things off, or maybe they might need more money, and we'll hear about that later.
Well, it can be operating relatively soon. There's a bit more work to do, but it's a real project and $15 million from the government, comparable commitment from Santos, and it's one of a number of projects, 6 projects, as you rightly said, Kieran, focused on carbon capture, use and storage.
You know something's wrong when someone says it's a real project.
Well, also, just because something's real doesn't mean it's a good idea or that it works. Like Nikola Tesla's portable earthquake machine was real, but it was a really bad idea and it actually didn't work.
And it's also, the other issue is that there's been numerous announcements for CCS that haven't actually led to anything. There's been numerous funding commitments that also haven't resulted in anything operational as well. So the only thing real about carbon capture and storage is it's actually been a very good marketing tool for the fossil fuel industry. It's extended their social license and it's enabled us as the 3rd largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world to feel okay about that, because eventually we'll figure out ways to bury some of those emissions.
You know what else is real? The money that's been spent on it, the money that could have been spent on other things like renewable investment has been spent on CCS. That's pretty real.
Yep, there's certainly a real opportunity cost.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see where we go here.
And just in response to your comment earlier, which I heard, carbon capture, use and storage is strongly supported around the world. It's supported by the IPCC, the International Energy Agency. Joe Biden has said he's going to double down on it. The UK has major projects in this area. We're working with the United States on technology sharing and a technology partnership.
So it's almost like Angus Taylor was actually trying to correct Kieran Gilbert. He was running his own spin bin on Kieran Gilbert, who probably said before this, actually there's many issues with carbon capture and storage. But the minister has come in strongly in defence, much like a great promoter has.
He's got some talking points
and it's worth breaking down. So he said basically the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, supported, the International Energy Agency supported, and then the US administration supported. Now let's break those three down.
So yes, the IEA acknowledge that it is a technology that's possibly required. The IEA has also said that we need immediate and massive deployment of cleaner energy technology, not CCS, like actual clean renewable energy. They've also said from 2021 we need no new gas and oil investment.
If we are to actually meet our goal of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees.
The net zero plan. And the IEA themselves acknowledge that CCS has been just horrendously slow in its deployment. So sure, they acknowledge it as a technology, but there's all these other facts that Angus Taylor is cherry picking or leaving out.
And the other thing that I think we need to note, because this is something the Australian Institute I think has been quite capable of doing, the IEA and the IPCC have been wrong. They've been wrong about how good this technology is. And we know that because every target they have set for carbon capture and storage has failed. So let's look at this. The IEA, the IPCC, the G8, the Australian Coal Association, the Australian Government, and the Australian and the Council of the European Union have all set targets, all of which haven't been met. And we've listed them all out here, as you can see on the screen. Numerous projects that have been promised, numerous that have failed to deliver. In fact, we couldn't find one target that has actually been met over the last 20 years, despite all the hype from all these international organizations and all these domestic organizations. Nothing has actually been delivered except for one relatively scarred project, which we'll get to later. And then just on Joe Biden, he has also said that how about we double our emission reduction targets over the next 10 years? But let's not talk about that.
Working with the United States on technology sharing and a technology partnership covering carbon capture and use and storage.
Now, I'm going to put a book note, like a virtual book note right here. Now, remember that he is relying on the US right now to talk up carbon capture and storage. He's saying, oh, the US is just doubling down on this. We're working with them to share our technological know-how to make CCS work here. So I'm going to put a bookmark here. I'm going to come back to it later because this is important, right? This is like, imagine this is like a little like breadcrumb, and then the story arc, I'm going to come back to it, and then you're going to be like, okay. So
it has the potential to substantially reduce emissions, but importantly, allow us to strengthen industries like the one I'm here at today.
Strengthen our industry. So there we have it. It's the gas-fired recovery, just packaged in a slightly different ways. And the Minister for Emissions Reduction wants to strengthen our industries that create more emissions.
So he's just said it. Like it's not even spin. He said the whole purpose of this is to strengthen our industries like the one I'm in front of. What is he in front of? He's in front of a gas production facility. All it does is extract fossil fuels, liquefy them, and ship them overseas to be burnt. He's in front of a factory for pollution. And it's like, this will strengthen our pollution factories. That's basically what he's saying. And this is a big worry. Like, Australia has tripled its gas production in the last decade, right? Like, we are now the largest exporter of this stuff, liquefied natural gas. And according to Australia Institute research, if we dig up and extract and ship out and burn every bit of gas that Australia has, that is the same amount as the fossil fuel emissions of the entire world 3 times over. That's how much emissions that we could potentially produce from these pollution factories right here. And he's saying, How good is it that we're strengthening this using this technology?
It's also worth mentioning that the Resources Minister, Keith Pitt, it's not in this interview, but when they announced this $50 million for the CCS grants, he said, this is what we need to keep the coal industry alive. This is going to make sure coal is part of the energy mix as well. So yeah, they're actually not hiding it. They want it for coal and gas. Sure, maybe bricks, whatever, but mainly coal and gas.
Strengthen Australian businesses and jobs. And that is a great thing for Australia, a great opportunity for Australia in terms of our export industries, our job creation, and that's why we're so positive about it.
Which industries?
Well, he's talking obviously about the gas industry, right? And that's why he's so positive about it. Let's break it down, all right? So it's strengthening the fossil fuel industry.
Yep.
Jobs.
Jobs, what's next? Is this going to strengthen jobs?
Yeah, well, no, it's not going to strengthen jobs. How much did he say that they're committing?
So if we're just looking at these grants, and we couldn't find where this figure came from, by the way, if it's just the $50 million, apparently it's going to create 470 jobs. Keep in mind that, across 6 projects...
So that's about $100,000 of taxpayer support to create one job. Yep.
Bear in mind, this is just a development fund. So there's nothing to say that these projects are going to work and that those jobs will go into the future.
And what's worse is that gas is a terrible way to create jobs. If you look at the visual in front of you right now, this is basically the amount of jobs that you will get per million dollars invested. And right at the bottom, that teeny tiny bit is the oil and gas extraction industry. It is actually the worst sector you can invest in for job creation. And yet that was the go-to for the federal government under the gas-fired recovery during the pandemic. And they're still going at it right now in their attempts to strengthen it through this technology.
And one above it on that graph is coal mining. And one of these projects is for a coal plant as well. So either way, terrible investment.
Yep. And then on top of that, right, if you look at the gas industry and the health of the gas industry, during the pandemic, they actually shed 10% of their workforce, right? Compared to what I think about 1.7% across the entire economy. So it is actually a sector that is too busy firing its employees to actually have a gas-fired recovery, but we'll try and patch that with additional taxpayer support at about maybe $100,000 a job. Oh, the other thing was exports. He said great for exports.
So great for exports? Nah, not really. So Japan, who is our biggest customer for coal and gas, has just doubled their renewable energy target and have announced that they're going to slash LNG in Japan. So what does that mean for our exports? Not great. We can extract as much LNG as we want, but we're not going to be able to sell it anywhere.
So it's not necessarily good for export creation, certainly not good for job creation. So what is it good for?
Well, I think Kevin Gallagher thinks it's pretty good.
Yeah, he does.
If you look across those 6 projects, they're taking carbon dioxide
on how soon?
Okay, so are we tackling carbon dioxide?
No, because 2 of these projects are for extending the life of gas and coal, and CCS in general is going to be used for extending the life of gas and coal. So I just want to explain how the Santos CCS is going to work, right? So when you extract gas, it comes from reservoirs and the methane is mixed with carbon dioxide, right? So you extract that, and then to get your gas, just your methane, you have to separate the carbon dioxide from the methane. Normally that CO2 is just vented and then you've got your nice clean methane.
That's
so
nice.
Fresh.
That's nice.
So nice and fresh, pure. So you're only capturing like a tiny part of all those emissions that are part of that project.
Yep.
So because there's all these fugitive emissions at every part of gas production, you've got like CO2 and methane coming out. And we know that methane is more potent than CO2. Like over about a 20-year lifespan, it's far more potent. So he is just talking about capturing a tiny part of the emissions resulting from this project. If CCS enables new gas and oil projects to go ahead, overall, you've got a net increase in emissions. So I guess you're tackling emissions in the sense that you're like feeding them and nurturing them and making them grow, but you're not suppressing them at all. It's not true. This does my head. It's not true. And also, he mentions tackling emissions. Nowhere in this interview is climate change mentioned.
No.
Or climate. He talks about the job and economy and growth and everything, but nothing to do with climate change.
Because it does sound great, it sounds
Well,
promising, and we hope it works, but how soon before it works?
It can be operating very soon. All they need to do is capture that CO2 and put it back into the reserves a few kilometres from here, which have held CO2 for millions and millions of years, Kieran. So this is a straightforward operation.
So straightforward. Millions and millions of years, the CO2's been living there happily. We pulled it out. We said, we just need your friend. You can go back down in there. You just stay down there for millions and millions. It's really straightforward. It's so straightforward that we've never been able to make this work to date. Despite billions of dollars spent, we haven't been able to work something really straightforward.
It's like returning a baby bird to its nest.
That's right. It's really straightforward. Here's how not straightforward it is, right? There is one project in Australia that is actually working. Not fully operational, just working, right? It is one of the largest in the world. It is over in the northwest of WA. It's managed by Chevron, one of the oil and gas majors, with Shell and ExxonMobil, two other majors, also as minority partners. Now, in 2016, they were supposed to, under their agreement, start capturing the CO2 that was coming out of a gas facility similar to Moomba and putting it back underground. Wasn't working in 2016. Wasn't working in 2017. Wasn't working in 2018. In 2019, they took out the streamers. They're like, woohoo, we got it working, finally. And then it never worked to full operation. In fact, they found a whole bunch of problems when they did get it started. And so it hasn't sequestered anything close to what it was supposed to sequester. The result is about 10 million tons of CO2 that has been released instead of buried through this straightforward method. And to give you an idea of what 10 million tons of CO2 looks like, it's about the same size as every single flight taken in Australia for a whole year. That's how much pollution was released because it isn't straightforward.
And this is a gross oversimplification too. Like, you look up any diagram by CCS proponents, and really what it shows is basically like a little hose going into the ground where you pump the CO2 back in. It's so complex and it's so expensive, and actually every project is different because the geological conditions where you're putting that CO2 vary dramatically. One of the huge problems with Gorgon that they've never been able to get right is the pressure because of those geological conditions. And every time you pump CO2 into another well, that changes the pressure conditions slightly. So it's not straightforward. It's beset with complexity. He's actually being really disingenuous when he says that.
Kevin Gallagher is very confident about it.
Oh, I'm getting $15 million. Sounds pretty sweet.
So he's just given the CEO of Santos $15 million. And now the CEO of Santos is very confident about his project, right? And here's what can you just read his
I've got
exact
the
words?
quotes here. I've got two quotes.
Okay.
I don't know his voice, but I'll try. Australia needs large-scale CCS project to make development of our oil and gas resources viable for investors, financiers and customers so that the wealth of these resources can be unlocked for the nation.
That seems pretty confident.
It seems highly confident.
It seems really confident.
For the nation.
Yeah.
Or for you.
Yeah. And I mean, the best part is, right, that this project will happen regardless, right? This is just a cherry on top for him, right? Because as Angus Taylor says,
Economics work, they're very, very strong.
The economics work, they're very, very strong.
What does that even mean? That's just a buzzword to confuse or to reassure people.
Yeah, because if the economics was very, very strong, then the government wouldn't be involving itself in this, right? The market would be then setting up CCS projects everywhere.
This would have happened in 2007.
Right? You'd be connecting hoses to the back of tailpipes in cars and burying it in geological storages in your backyard. If the economics was working, you'd be doing that, right? They don't work. They don't work, which is why the government is involving itself in this stuff.
Santos itself says they don't work. So I had that first quote from Kev. I've got another one. Yeah, we're technically ready, but an approved... Sorry. We're technically ready, but an approved methodology for CCS projects to generate Australian carbon credit units through the Emissions Reduction Fund is essential to make this project stack up economically.
So it's not economic.
It's not economic.
And
it requires a change to the law.
So what that means basically is that their pollution factory requires carbon credits to pay them to then put some of that pollution back into the ground.
Yeah, so they're getting the 15 million in a grant, and then they want
on top
more
of that
money
from the very small pool of money actually dedicated to generating carbon credits. But look, let's remember it's a real project, okay?
It's real, but it is a real
It's a real project, right? Right?
And that's why it's a very real project. It'll need to be credited under our crediting mechanism, the Emissions Reduction Fund, and we're well advanced, and we expect to have that concluded by the end of this year, and that'll put the project in a position to immediately proceed.
So this methodology for allowing carbon capture and storage to generate carbon credits to sell has not even been approved. It's only just gone out for consultation.
We just finished our submission here at the Australia Institute.
Yeah, but Angus has already promised Kevin that this is going to happen. I don't know, that doesn't seem entirely ethical to me.
Seems like a bit of a stitch up, really. It's like, we'll get you 15 million now, then we'll get you some sweet carbon credits.
Yeah, and you actually, when you apply you have to apply this methodology to be able to generate those carbon credits. It's pretty rigorous. It's not just a fait accompli that you're going to get them, but Angus seems to be implying that this one is legit. This one is going to automatically meet all that criteria.
And that in itself is really dodgy. The entire idea of crediting carbon capture and storage has only come from a review that Angus Taylor commissioned secretly from another oil executive, Grant King, and then adopted those recommendations and is now pushing his clean energy regulator to come up with a methodology which will be approved from a committee that he's stacked with CCS proponents.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the chair of the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, who decides what methodology gets through, the chair of that is I think only just recently stepped down from being the CEO of a CCS lobby group.
So there you go, all sorted out.
Cool.
But this is a real project, right?
So it's very real, but
It's very, very real. This is a very real project.
and what you're seeing here is technology in
Is there a
action.
chance that
Technology, not
Santos-
taxes.
Technology, not taxes.
I'm so sick of hearing that.
Now that's the three-word slogan. I know this government said it doesn't do three-word slogans, but that's just three-word slogan, right? But it just seems ridiculous, right? No taxes.
So I guess the part about the no taxes is true in the sense that they are not taxing businesses and they're not regulating businesses and saying you shouldn't be emitting CO2 in the first place. Actually, if anything, they're giving money to businesses. It's a tax, though, in the sense that significant tax revenue have been given already to these projects to support the continued use of fossil fuels.
Yeah, so basically it's taxes that have come from us that pay for technologies that don't work, so fossil fuel companies can continue to pollute and produce more fossil fuels because everyone thinks that technology, not taxes, is the slogan that will get us towards what? Ideally, to meet climate targets. We don't have many in Australia anyway, so I guess it's very easy to meet those targets.
Yeah, if you've got no target. It's pretty easy to meet. Like, it's also a double blow, though, because these massive companies pay very little tax. Some pay no tax themselves. So I think even Santos last year paid about a third of the corporate rate on its income tax. So that's just a double blow. That's revenue we could be using for other things.
I mean, so the one company that has the one CCS project, Chevron, was not paying any tax, and what tax it was liable for paying, it dodged. And it dodged not even in a very intelligent way, in a way that the Australian Tax Office successfully prosecuted them for tax dodging. So that's how successful they've been at running these types of events.
Is there a chance that Santos can use this technology as well to enhance oil recovery? Or do you seek guarantees that it won't be used for that purpose?
This is just to give you a heads up. Enhanced oil recovery is important. That's where this technology came from, carbon capture and storage. Sticking CO2 that you capture into the reservoirs, into those wells, you're driving up oil and capturing additional oil that you couldn't otherwise get from the natural pressure underground, right? That's how the whole technology came from. And then what they really did at the end is they stuck a plug in the ground and said, there you go. It's in there for millions and millions of years. It'll be stored there forever, right? Now that's how most CCS projects have actually gotten off the ground. So every target hasn't been met, but of the 28 CCS projects that actually exist in the world, 3/4 are for enhanced oil recovery. So therefore extracting more fossil fuels by using CCS.
And actually those depleted wells too are a real worry, because when they were putting the CO2 in to try and get the last dregs of that oil out and plugging it up, they weren't actually thinking we need to keep this CO2 here. It wasn't front of mind. So the structural integrity of those plugs is a real worry. Similarly with all those depleted oil wells in Australia where they're looking at storing that CO2, there's really, there's a high risk of long-term leakage.
Well, there's no plan to do that here. There's a lot of that being done in the United States, and the CO2 is being sequestered that way. That's not the plan here.
There you go. So now my bookmark. He's basically said there's a lot of that enhanced oil recovery in the US where the CO2 is sequestered in that way, but it's not the plan here, right? Now, just a while ago, he said, we're working very closely with the US. In fact, we're sharing our technology, we're developing and cooperating on it, right? He's admitting that the entire basis for cooperating in this space is to work on technology, especially in the US, that's mainly used to enhance oil recovery. And we have no assurances from Santos that they're not doing that here. In fact, in previous annual reports, Santos has admitted that it will try and use enhanced oil recovery to recover more oil from Moomba. They've admitted that much.
But look, the plan is ultimately about using technology to create jobs and create a new export industry. What we can do here is send low emissions or zero emissions gas to places like Japan and Korea and sequester that carbon dioxide so that they can reduce their emissions and create Australian jobs at the same time.
So we kind of covered this. There's no such thing as low emissions gas, because all this CCS is doing is it's not making the product carbon neutral or anything. It's capturing a tiny proportion of the overall emissions generated by this project. It's just those CO2 reservoir emissions that are mixed in with the gas down there. So it's not low emissions gas. That's patently untrue. And even if he was talking about something like hydrogen, which I know Australia's been talking to Japan about, that hydrogen is not hydrogen that's generated with renewable electricity. That's reduced with LNG too, isn't it?
The government has spent over $3 billion, both at a state and federal level, and only has one relatively checkered project to show for it in the Gorgon site in WA. Now, with everything that has failed on CCS, they want to take this CCS technology that they've used so successfully in keeping coal going as clean coal and gas going as clean gas, and they want to use it now for hydrogen. Now, why that's a real risk is because you can make hydrogen in one of two ways. You can make it in a zero emissions way by using renewable energy and water to electrolyze it, and you get hydrogen, and when you burn it, you get electricity or energy and water vapor. Zero emissions. Or you can make hydrogen using coal or gas, a really emissions intensive, dirty way of doing it. And the only way that you could justify doing that is if you pretend to bury those emissions underground, which is what Minister Taylor is looking to do by pushing CCS once again. And that's why we're seeing this rise up as an issue once more. We're seeing the federal government bring out its checkbook and sign fat stacks for more CCS technology. This is the real risk. This is why it's important you pay attention now, because they're going to use this magic trick again to ruin a new industry, which is creating zero emissions hydrogen, green hydrogen, but replacing that with a dirty way of making hydrogen using fossil fuels. That's what's really at risk right now.
And they'll still be sprinkling it with the old economic argument and jobs argument and strengthening industry argument as well.
Every time you hear carbon capture and storage, think big marketing trick, because that's what it is. If anyone says CCS sounds like a great tech, ask them, has it worked? Has it actually worked? Has any target actually been met? How much taxpayer support has been given to CCS, and what do we have to show for it? Do you need carbon capture and storage? Or is there an actual zero emissions technology way that we can proceed right now, rather than this magic pudding of burying the problem underground forever? That's the questions you should be asking, because CCS to date in Australia has been nothing but spin.
We've got several reports about this on our website. That table we put up before, if anyone does bring it up and says, yeah, it's a legitimate technology, grab that table from that report and you can list every single target that CCS has failed to meet, not only in Australia, around the world.
And we're not saying that there aren't some legitimate uses for carbon capture, utilization and storage. We know that there are, but there is no serious consideration for CCS in Australia beyond it being a marketing tool for the fossil fuel industry, and that has been championed by successive governments. And until we remove that spin, it is very hard to have a serious and legitimate conversation about the credibility of this technology. So we need everyone, including proponents for actually using it seriously, to actually speak up about how this has been a giant marketing tool.
We make these videos to give you the tools to debunk the myths and the spin that our government is perpetuating.
To give you the information so you feel confident to go out and have conversations about these things like carbon capture and storage, or around technology, not taxes. Because if you don't feel confident enough to have those conversations, the government will keep getting away with this type of spin. They'll keep avoiding reducing Australia's emissions, and we're going to continue to see global warming accelerate. So it's up to you to take this information and to make it useful. And if you want more, share this video, go to our website, donate to us. All those things mean we can do more so that you can feel more empowered, so that you can do more. It's a very real project, Polly.
It's so real, and so are the 20,000 flies that have just flown into that guy's mouth.
Look, it reminds me of Pinocchio, where he tells Geppetto, "I'm a real boy, Dad. I'm a real boy." And then his nose grows. Whoop. You don't need to tell someone it's real. We can all tell if it's real or not. If you keep saying it's real, it's probably because it's not. And that's the case here. That's been the case with carbon capture and storage.